Chapter 33. Kemi lived in a one-bedroom apartment on Franklin Street, one of the few streets in San Francisco that never went to sleep. At all hours of the night, just like THC Day, cars accelerated down THC Hill, filling the air with exhaust fumes that rose to the level of her second-floor apartment. The noise of engines, brakes, and the occasional blaring of horns meant that the night was never silent, and nor was it dark. There was always a steady stream of headlights and sometimes the whirling lights of emergency vehicles, their sirens piercing the night with their high-pitched wails. Sleep was hard, but then it always was these days. If Teo did fall asleep, he dreamt of Nigeria and awoke sweating. He had two recurring nightmares, one where he was drowning in a prison cell and the other where Abdu floated away in the form of a sheet of paper that Teo could never catch. People said that after the accident, Abdu appeared fine. When they pulled him from the wreck, he was able to walk and insisted on helping carry Teo. The nurses had bandaged Abdu's facial lacerations, but it was the bleeding inside, the bleeding nobody saw, that later caused Abdu to collapse and die. They said that little could have been done, even had they caught the internal bleeding, but Teo was not convinced. He knew that more medical attention had been given to him that day than to Abdu. Now Abdu was dead and there was nothing Teo could do to bring him back. Here Teo was in America, far from Nigeria, unable to comfort Abdu's family, and not even able to support his own family. The plan was for Teo to stay with Kemi in San Francisco for a month. Enough time to be seen by the medical specialists and wait for his leg to recover. While abroad, he would contact universities to find out what jobs might be open to him. Kemi had organized his trip to the US, flying him via France. He regretted not being able to fly through London to see Vanessa, even though he knew that not only was it a miracle that he had survived the accident, but also that he had got out of the country. Kemi had insisted that he use her bedroom while she slept in a room created out of a storage cupboard. He tried to insist on having the makeshift room, but she wouldn't let him, and, even though she never said anything to suggest that he was being a burden, he felt that he was a great encumbrance. What father, he repeatedly asked himself, should be relying on a daughter in such a way? And then, when he found out that Kemi was working as a nanny to fund her artistic endeavors, it felt even worse. How could his daughter be doing such a menial job while he lived with her, in her flat, doing nothing? His days dragged by, and the television became his companion. He watched the news on CNN and CNBC, morning, afternoon and evening. He watched in the hope of catching some international news, but almost always the cover age was domestic, of child abuse, murders and serial killings, with just one lone global minute to cover the rest of the world. Sometimes he thought he should listen to music rather than watch television, but he could not muster much interest in music these days. And yet there was plenty of music in the apartment. Kemi owned CDs of African musicians with names like Les Nubians, and Positive Black Soul. He guessed that this was the music she used to teach her students African dance and found it curious that his daughter, living abroad, probably knew more about African music than Africans in Africa. Kemi also owned some of Miriam's favorites, such as Sunny Aid and Miriam Makeba. And whenever she played these it brought back memories for Teo, some happy, but mostly sad. He wondered what Kemi told Miriam about him these days. Sometimes, when mother and daughter spoke on the phone, he would say a few words to Miriam. He would ask her how she was, and she did the same, short and perfunctory, speaking more for Kemi's sake than for theirs. Kemi left early every morning for work and returned around 6 in the evening. The routine was then for her to go out to buy cheap food on Boke or Union Street, or to have food delivered to the apartment in paper boxes and styro foam cups, and Teo worried that his daughter wasted money on such food. He also feared that she would not find the right husband without culinary skills. It wasn't that Kemi didn't know how to cook, she just didn't like it, and the fridge was always empty. Outside, it was crowded with magnetic letters, photographs of Kemi's friends, and an assortment of poems and sayings. Her boyfriend, Laurent, could cook, but that was his job. Teo presumed Kemi saw him during her lunch breaks and perhaps on the occasional evening when she came home late. He never asked. Laurent was a nice enough man but not, in his view, suitable for his daughter. The fact that he was a chef was bad enough, but he didn't have a degree either. Teo wondered if this was the price he now paid for encouraging Kemi as she grew up to have a mind of her own. He was pleased that at least Laurent did not visit the apartment or stay overnight. "You should get out, Daddy," Kemi insisted as the days passed. He told her that he did, even though it was obvious that he rarely left their apartment. He wanted to return to Nigeria. Here, in Kemi's San Francisco, he did not belong. He remembered one day going to buy his daughter some tea. He had been walking along Polk Street when he passed a shop selling international papers and spotted a story about Nigeria on the front page of Le Monde. He did not buy the paper, he was careful with the dollars Kemi gave him. But he sat down on the bench outside and read what he could from the front cover on display. The news was not good: falling oil prices and continued gulf. "No hope for Nigeria," he muttered, covering his head with both hands. "There. Government corruption." Next thing he knew, someone was tapping his shoulder and, when he looked up, a middle-aged woman was handing him a bagel. At first he was puzzled, then shocked. It was not even a whole bagel, but part of one, half-eaten. "You need to see a therapist," Kearney insisted. "You're suffering from depression." What right did she have to say such things? Besides, he did not believe in therapists, and nor should she. Therapy was a Western thing, a fad, and a waste of money. If he did not want to go out, why should he? His leg had not healed. His country was in chaos and he was trapped in America. Still, Kemi persisted. "You're depressed and you need to do something." "Don't tell me what to do, Kemi. I'm not going to stay here any longer than I have to if that's what you're concerned about." "I'm not concerned about that. I'm worried about you." "It's not your responsibility to worry about me. You've already taken care of the medical expenses." "You could see my therapist." €1 should do what? "You could see my therapist," Kearney repeated. "You have a therapist? For what?" "Oh, for goodness sake. What do you need one for? Do you think it was easy to live without a father for so many years and then to watch you and Mum divorce?" "But it doesn't matter why I see a therapist, Daddy. The fact is I do and it helps." "Well, I really don't understand." He shook his head. "And you wouldn't?" she shouted, thrusting her hands into the air in a jizz that shocked him in its resemblance to something her mother would do. "You hardly know me. You sent us off to England, never caring what happened to your wife or daughter. All that mattered was your work." "So is that what your mother tells you?" Teo asked, struggling to contain His anger. She didn't have to. I could see for myself. And this is how you speak to your father now. With no respect. Respect. Is that all that matters? What about love? I've always wanted to be close to you, but all the time you just talk about respect, bloody respect. Well, no. If you must know, I don't respect you. I don't respect what you did to us. I don't respect how you left us, how you always thought about work first. Now you come here and I try to help, I try to make suggestions, even Laurent tries and listen, don't talk to me about Laurent. Why? Because he's white? No, because in our culture. In our culture? Whose culture? The one you made up? In our culture, Kemi. You listen to your father. He shouted. Don't you dare shout at me. He stared at her, too shocked to speak. Never before had he seen his daughter. You always wanted me to marry an African, didn't you? She persisted. Nothing is good enough for you, is it? One teach African dance, one search for my roots. I try to help you by making suggestions, but nothing. Nothing. G is good enough. He kept quiet as she stormed out of the room, but he couldn't let her go and cry on her own. He tapped gently on the bathroom door. Kemi, please. Let's not talk this way. There was no reply, so he tapped again. No answer. He left for a while, packing up and down, listening to her sobs and wondering what to do next. Then she left the apartment, slamming the door behind her, not knowing what else to do. He went to the bathroom where she had just been. The smells of Kemi reminded him of Miriam, the soaps, shampoos, and perfumes of these two women, there. Women he had wronged. Why was he so incapable? So inept? What was wrong with him? Why couldn't he love another person the way one was supposed to? Mama, Miriam, Christine, Vanessa, Kemi, and even Hoa had despised him. It would be better that he went away and left everyone in peace. Later that evening, when Kemi finally returned and he saw that she was fine, he told her that he was taking a walk. The fog had rolled in and the air hung damp and cold, but he could not be bothered with a coat. He walked as fast as he could, ignoring the pain in his leg, past Fort Mason, past the marina, and up to the Golden Gate Bridge. How easy it would be to jump. Just jump. While he calculated the odds of certain death, the height, the fact that he had never learnt to swim, a car whizzed past playing Michael Jackson's music. Theo turned and saw a little girl waving from the open window. He thought of Kemi again and turned from the water. She was on the phone when he got back. I have no idea where the hell he is, she was saying. He pushed quietly on the door handle to let himself out again, but then he paused with his hands still there, listening. I don't want to call the police, Laurent. I know he's just off somewhere sulking. He doesn't care. He won't even speak to his friends and he doesn't know that Mum's the Pause. Son sending all this money to pay for his medical bills. He doesn't give a shit. Theo stepped back into the apartment, shutting the door noisily. Kemi refused to talk after she hung up the phone, but later that night, Theo. You know, Kemi, when one was young, we didn't talk about our girlfriends or boyfriends to our parents, he began, and one forgets sometimes that you were not always raised in Nigeria as one was, but you must believe that one have nothing against white people, nothing at all. Thinking about race is the American way. I wouldn't mind if I married someone white. To be honest, I'd be more concerned if you married a Nigerian. There are not ours crooks about these days. And besides, Well, he paused for a second. Not the first person to fall in love with a white person, you know. You did? Kemi looked up and smiled. Oh, a long time ago. Teo shrugged, feeling silly now for having brought it up. Vanessa was someone I met at Oxford. Did you think of marrying her? Suppose we did, but then I met your mum and what, Daddy? And then, well, that's all. You don't have to worry about what 1911 think, Daddy, Kearney smiled. Is Vanessa Richardson, isn't it? Yes, as a matter of fact it was, Teo replied, trying not to sound too surprised. It wasn't hard to guess, Daddy, Kemi laughed. You've mentioned her several times since you've been here. Have I? I really didn't think. Well, in any case she's married now and... She looked at him, perhaps expecting him to say more, but there was nothing more to say. He met her gaze and she nodded with grown-up understanding that made him uncomfortable. Sometimes I wonder how Laurent's parents really feel. You've met them already? He was not used to this grown-up child of his. Nobody had ever prepared him for this. They lived in Africa, you know. Laurent's father worked with medicines. Sans François. His father is very nice, but it's his mother. Well, maybe all mothers are protective of their sons. Do you think so, Daddy? He shrugged as if he didn't know, but he did because Mama had been that way. I'd like his mother to accept me. And she should, my love. She should. He squeezed Kemi's hand. Which parent wouldn't be delighted to have you as a daughter-in-law? He said softly, resting his head on her shoulder and shutting his eyes. I hope you know that I didn't mean any of those nasty things I said this afternoon, Kemi whispered, placing a hand on his knee. I love you, Daddy, very much, and even respect you. He squeezed her young hand, fighting back the tears, his first tears since his arrest, which his daughter knew nothing about and hopefully never would.